Hello and welcome to the homework. First of all, congratulations for those of you who took the challenge of solving the homework. I could never emphasize enough that the best way to learn something is to practice, so I hope you can practice this as much as you can. And in this tutorial, I'm going to provide the solution. So, the homework was to make a request to check if the blockchain is valid. So I already prepared a new code section here, checking if the blockchain is valid. And we're going to simply make another request. The good news, and that was the first thing to notice, is that basically, of course, we already made a function that returns true or false, whether respectively the chain is valid, yes or no. So of course, we're going to use that function in the request, and we will return different responses depending on the result of this function. So let's do this. Let's start by specifying the decorator. So again, I'm going to copy this. The decorator, because of course it is still going to be a get request because we're not posting or creating any new data structure like a transaction. So it's still a get request, and here we need to specify a new name for this get request, and we're going to call it simply is valid, and this request will check if the blockchain is valid. All right, so now let's define the function that will execute this request. So we're going to call this function is valid, very simply, with some parentheses, taking nothing as argument because we will simply get our blockchain object, and from this blockchain object we will get the isChainValid function, which will return true or false whether our chain is valid. So let's do this. The first thing that we need to do is, as we said, just take our blockchain object, and from this blockchain object we take the isChainValid method that we created in part 1 of this implementation. And so if we go back to this function, isChainValid, well, we can see that it takes as argument just the chain of our blockchain, which was introduced in the init method. So let's do this. Let's take this chain, and to take this chain, since this chain belongs to our blockchain object, well, we need to get our blockchain object first, and from this object we get the chain. All right, perfect. So this will return true or false whether or not respectively the chain is valid. So since this returns something, I'm going to introduce a new variable that I'm going to call isValid, and that will be this result, true or false. And depending on this result, now we're going to make an if condition which will check if isValid is true or false. If it is true, we'll return a message saying that everything's all right. And if it is false, we'll return a message saying that we have a problem. All right, so let's do this. Let's make this if condition. To make this if condition the beautiful way, we can just do if is valid colon, which means if is valid equals true, because is valid is a boolean. So just if is valid, and if it is true, well, we want the response to be containing the following message, which will be all good, the blockchain is valid. Dot. All good, the blockchain is valid, because is valid is equal to true. Perfect. But then, if is valid is not true, that is, if we are in the else, which is the condition that is valid is false, well, in that case, the response will be different. The response will be, well, we can input the following message saying, Houston, we have a problem. Houston, we have a problem. The blockchain is not valid. And here we go. We have our two responses based on the two possibilities that the blockchain is yes or no valid. All right, and now we just need to, of course, return the response in the JSON format with the 200 OK HTTP status code. There we go. Now everything's all right. The warning just disappeared. Everything should be okay. That should be the final solution of the homework, but we're going to test it now. So as you can see, I restarted my kernel, which means that I stopped the previous execution of the code, and then I clicked on this tool button here to restart the kernel. You'll see in the options. And I did that, of course, because we modified the code here. So we're going to run it again. And so let's do this now. We have the code that runs the app here, so everything's all right. We're ready to select the whole code, and let's execute it. All right, no error, perfect, running on the Flask URL on port 5000. Now let's jump to Postman. Here is Postman, and let's make our request. So we're going to do the same as before, as in the final tutorial of module 1, but this time we're also going to test this new request that we've just made, that is the isValid request. Okay, so remember the address we have to enter here. We can take it again in the Flask Quick Start Guide. That's this one. That's the address of the server. So let's go back to Postman. Let's paste this URL and let's try first with get chain, but everything should be okay. We haven't modified anything in the other code sections. So that's the Genesis block. Perfect. Now let's mine a few blocks. Let's just mine 5 of them. Mine block. There we go. The first block mined, a second one, third one, and fourth one. So now we have 5 blocks because the Genesis block was not mined. Perfect. So now let's get our chain again to see what it looks like. Get chain. And here is our chain with the 5 blocks. Perfect. And now we're going to test our new request that we've just made, which we called isValid. And if you're ready, we are now going to check if our blockchain is okay. So let's do this. Let's press enter. And there we go. All good. The blockchain is valid. So perfect. Congratulations for those of you who managed to get this. You could actually have written anything you want in the message, but the idea was to make these two conditions in an if and else using our isChainValid function to check if it is valid. This isChainValid function is, by the way, not only going to be used for this homework, it is also going to be used in module 2, because in module 2 we'll have to make a consensus, because since we will decentralize our blockchain, well, we will need to check that the blockchain on each of the nodes of the network, on each of the servers of the network, is the same chain, so that, we check that all the nodes are up to date. And you'll see, in order to check this, we will do a preliminary check that the chain is valid. So that was not only for the homework and for you to practice, this will also be very useful for us in module 2. Alright, so now we're ready to move on to module 2. I can't wait to see you there, and until then, enjoy blockchains.